science, writing memoirs justifying their own part and blaming everybody else. None of these things was done by Hess. He simply moved off to Switzerland, from there to Belgium, from there to Holland. He went to Marseille and opened a brush shop. The brush shop didn't last very long, of course. He went bankrupt very, very soon because he was not a very astute businessman. But by this time he inherited a fourth part of his father's fortune, who died about this time. And on this rather modest fortune, he and his wife settled down to live in Paris in about 1853. And there he began to study the sciences, because for some reason he decided that it was important to study physics and physiology because the future of mankind lay with the rational utilization of scientific data. And so he taught himself physics, chemistry, physiology, to no great effect, but still he undoubtedly did possess certain knowledge of it. Indeed, he even wrote a book about it, which appeared posthumously, which some people think highly of, although I cannot say, I haven't looked at it, that it appears to be anything but a hodgepodge of the most extraordinary combination of theology, physics, and metaphysics. However, that's by the way. In the middle 50s, he settled down as a journalist. He was a contributor to various newspapers in the Rhineland, in Switzerland, and even to German newspapers in America, in Chicago. And he began to take an interest in the movement for Italian liberation. He also became a great fan of La Salle. He spoke about La Salle as having Goethe's head on Jewish shoulders. And they became great friends, indeed, until La Salle's death. And he began to help La Salle with his great new Federation of German Workers, which was the foundation of the German Social Democratic Party. That is to say, he led the ordinary life of an émigré radical. The Italian movement, however, had a curious effect upon him. Moses Hess was never exactly opposed to nationalism. He always supposed that for the purposes of a peaceful, united mankind, not the abolition of nations was necessary, but their union. And unless there were nations, you couldn't unite them. He rather followed with great sympathy, as Marx did not, the movement of the Italians to liberate themselves. Naturally, Hess had a most violent prejudice against the Roman Church, which he regarded, like all radicals of his day, as the chief source of darkness and oppression among nations, not only the source of the oppression of his own people, the Jews, but of course also as a major factor in the disunity, economic backwardness, and general squalor of Italy. And in this respect, I think most Italian radicals agreed with him. And in the course of thinking about Italian unity, and about the overthrow of the papacy by the new Italian patriots led by Mazzini and Garibaldi and so forth, he, I think, began thinking about his own nationality, the Jews. Towards the end of the 50s, this trend of thought began. And he began to wonder whether a risorgimento was reserved for the Italians alone, or whether perhaps his own people might not itself go through some similar process. Whether La Salle's national brand of socialism, for he was collaborating closely with La Salle at the time, had influenced him, or whether his ideas grew according to some inner pattern of their own, there's no doubt that he spoke and wrote after having become acquainted with the Italian movement like a man transfigured, like Descartes or Hume or Rousseau after some extraordinary transforming experience which altered their vision of the world. And it was then really that he returned to Cologne under an amnesty produced by Bismarck in 1861, and published his book, a very surprising book, called Roman Jerusalem, which is really the subject, fundamental topic of this lecture. No notice of his book was really taken at the time, immediately. A little notice was taken in German Jewish papers, but not very much. And certainly no interest was taken by the political specialists or general readers. But on the educated German Jews, it felt like a bombshell, as indeed it was intended to do. Even today, almost 100 years after its publication, when much of it is necessarily obsolete, and a great deal that must have seemed wildly utopian has in fact come to pass, it still impresses one as a masterpiece of analysis. It is penetrating, it is clear, it is candid, and it is very honest. And it's filled with extremely disturbing home truths, calculated to cause acute discomfort to the liberal assimilationists among the Jews everywhere. And in spite of its occasional rhetoric, it's profoundly, and at least to me, irresistibly moving. It's a description of the Jews in the West, it's a profession of faith, and it's a program for the future. The twin tricks of his cosmopolitan socialist friends no longer affect him at all. Moses Hess had obviously had a growing consciousness of what it was to be a Jew in Europe, mounting within him, ever since the insult of Becker in 1840 with regard to the Wacht am Rhein. Perhaps the Damascus case, or at least so he says. To this he gave expression which he had for a great many years repressed in order to give himself over to the work of the proletariat. Finally, it proved too strong to stifle, and he at last wrote a book and felt at peace. Roman Jerusalem consists of a preface, 12 letters written to a bereaved lady, an epilogue, and 10 supplementary notes. It deals with a vast variety of subjects, but the essential tone is given near the beginning of the book in the first letter, in which the author says, I quote the book, "Here I am again, after 20 years of estrangement in the midst of my people. I take part in its days of joy and sorrow, in its memories and hopes, its spiritual struggles within its own house and among the civilized peoples in whose midst it lives, but with which, despite 2,000 years of common life and effort, it cannot achieve complete unity. One thought which I believed I'd extinguished forever within my breast is once more vividly present to me, the thought of my nationality, inseparable from the heritage of my fathers, from the Holy Land, the eternal city, the birthplace of the belief in the divine unity of life and in the future brotherhood of all men." This typical combination of socialist universalism and the Bible marks all Hess's writings. He's rather like a Jewish version of Christian socialism, you'll find. Hess goes on to say that nationality is real. Nations are real historical growths, like families and like physical types. To deny this is to falsify the facts, and springs, as a rule, from such motives as fear and cowardice. In the case of the Jews, the ringing phrases which some among them use against nationalism as medieval prejudice are only an attempt to disguise their desire to dissociate themselves from what Hess calls their unhappy, persecuted, ridiculed people. And this must create a false situation that becomes increasingly unbearable to everyone. Europeans have always regarded the existence of the Jews as an anomaly. It may well be that the progress of justice and humanity will one day lead to justice for the Jews. They will perhaps be emancipated, but they'll never be respected, says Hess, so long as they repeat the principle, ubi bene, ibi patria. That's to say, where conditions are good, there is my country. Denial of nationality forfeits everyone's respect. Naturalization is no solution. He quotes, let me quote again. "It is not the pious old Jew who would rather have his tongue cut out than misuse it by denying his nationality. It is the modern Jew who is despicable for disowning his race because the heavy hand of fate oppresses it. Beautiful words like humanity and enlightenment that he scatters so lavishly to cloak his treason to his fellow Jews will not save him from the stern verdict of public opinion. It is no use pleading various geographical or philosophical or historical alibis. The modern Jew is despised for trying to lead the sinking ship." I quote again, "You may don 1,000 masks, you may change your name and your religion and your mode of life, you may creep through the world incognito so that nobody notices that you're a Jew. Yet every insult to the Jewish name will wound you more than a man of honor who remains loyal to his family and defends its good name." Some Jews in Germany think they may save themselves by modernizing their religion or finally by conversion, but this won't help them. Neither reform, he says, nor baptism, neither education nor emancipation will completely open before the Jews of Germany the doors of social life. The Germans are anti-Jewish racially. The tall, blonde Germans are very conscious of the small, dark Jews as being different from themselves. What the Germans hate is not the Jewish religion so much as the Jewish noses. Consequently, what the Jews attempt to deny is not so much their religion as their race. But their noses will not vanish, their hair will remain curly. Their type has after all remained unaltered, he says, since the ancient Egyptian bas-reliefs, upon which the Semitic type is quite unmistakable. The type persists. They are, he says, a race, a brotherhood, a nation, whose own existence is unfortunately denied by its own children, and one which every street urchin considers it his duty to despise so long as it is homeless. Homelessness is the heart of the problem, for without soil, man sinks to the status of parasite, feeding on others. The German Jews cannot understand this. They are genuinely puzzled by German anti-Semitism. They feel